Hi everyone, my name is Rhea and I'm a TA for USC's Young Scientists Program. And today we're going to be talking about ziplines. Alright, so I'm sure some of you may have either seen ziplines in videos or maybe even been on one in person. But as you can see in the picture, a zipline is a long and inclined cable with a pulley and harness for the rider. And they were used for transporting goods down mountains and across rivers and through forests when walking them wasn't really an option. And now they're used more for recreation and fun and tourism. And what's really important when building zip lines is to know that zip lines use multiple forces like friction, motion, and gravity, which we've learned about before. And so how this works is that zip lines need to be at a slope, so gravity will pull the object or person downward, and it'll continue to accelerate it until friction is able to slow the object down. So zip lines always need to be at a slope. Isaac Newton was a mathematician and physicist, and he came up with 3 important laws of motion. So what are these laws? Well, the first law is that any object that's sitting still will continue to sit still, and any object that's moving will continue to move unless a force is enacted. So, for example, if you have a ball sitting on a grass field, it won't move until you kick it, okay? And once you kick the ball, it will continue to fly forever until something stops it. And usually what that something is on Earth is gravity, right? We know gravity will pull the ball back down eventually. The second law of motion is that the greater the mass of an object, the more force it will take to accelerate the object. So we can think about this in terms of pushing a shopping cart versus pushing a car. So we know a car has a lot more mass than a shopping cart, which means it takes a lot more force for us to be able to push it. Finally, the third law states that for each action that occurs, there is always an equal and opposite reaction. And this means that there's 2 opposite forces kind of pulling in opposite directions. So we can think of this as like a dog on a leash, right? Sometimes the dog's pulling this way and you're pulling the opposite way. Now that we've learned a little bit about zip lines and Isaac Newton's laws of motion, we can move on to our question for today. And our question is, how can you design a safe and effective zip line? And what we're going to do for our prediction is to draw a picture of how you're planning to make your zip line. And let's remember to include and think about Newton's laws of motion as well as forces that we talked about earlier, like gravity and friction, and how we should build our zip line so it's safe and effective. So go ahead and pause the video and draw your picture. Now that you've made your prediction, let's use that and move on to our experiment. So for our experiment, you're kind of going to be able to make your zip line with whatever materials that you have at home. But here's some options that you can choose from. So you're going to want some string, yarn, or ribbon to make the actual zip line with. And you're going to want a plastic or paper cup to use as a bucket. You're going to want some passengers like a toy or an eraser to ride inside the cup. And you're going to want a paper clip, a pipe cleaner, or something else to kind of attach the bucket. And you might need some tape depending on what materials you're using as well. Now that we've finished our experiment, let's make some observations. So what did you notice during the experiment? What worked well and what could be improved? Let's take a minute to reflect on these questions. Finally, let's think about how Newton's laws apply to the zip line that you've created. Let's write a sentence about what we learned for our conclusion. I'd also like to share the link to this really interesting video about how some students in Colombia have to cross a canyon through a zip line to get to school. And the link is in the description below. Now it's time to talk about a scientist. Albin Gonzalez is a physicist, similar to Isaac Newton, but he specifically works in the field of medical physics. He's currently working on cancer treatments using physics and also works on innovation with technology in the medical field. What an important job! And that's all for today. Thanks for joining, everyone.